Hey everybody, Mike Jeffers, Chicago Jazz Magazine, Chicago Jazz Time, Chicago Jazz Magazine, ChicagoJazz.com, and welcome to Chicago Music Reveal. How about I have an intro now? See, I told you we were going to be building up here, so I'm glad you guys keep tuning in because you know what's going to happen here on Chicago Music Revealed. I'm Mike Jeffers, of course, the founder of Chicago Jazz Magazine, also the program director at the Epiphany Center for the Arts. Soon to be opening. We are very excited as soon as we're able to open. It's International Jazz Day, by the way, so everybody that's celebrating International Jazz Day, congratulations. By the way, we were actually working tandem with the Jazz Institute of Chicago, and tonight was going to be our opening night at Epiphany Center for the Arts, but unfortunately, all of this happened. So we are rescheduling, reworking things. We're getting ready. I have a feeling we'll probably be launching maybe a pop-up things in the summer and then shooting, potentially on what's going on. Probably looking at September, October-ish, assuming the city is okay with everything open back up. So we're going to keep our fingers crossed on the entire situation, but we all know the situation. And today on the show, I'm excited. I'm going to bring Chuck Webb on here in a second. We're going to be talking. He's like a first call bassist here in Chicago and across the country. He's toured with a myriad of artists. We're going to talk about that. He's also one of those guys that has the ability to play orchestrally, pop, rock, jazz, fusion, everything in between. So he does a lot of the performances, a lot of the shows downtown. He was in doing Hamilton. He's been doing a lot of, I can't even remember all the different shows he's been doing. So that's a conversation we're going to have a little talk on. And he's got a new group that he just put together right before the quarantine happened. They put out a release. We were going to have them perform at the Epiphany Center for the Arts, which we still will once we open up. Guru Tonic. So we're going to bring him on. We're going to talk about that in 1 second. But tomorrow, before I forget, Friday, of course, it's Friday. We've got Blues Day here on Chicago Music Revealed on Fridays. Dave Katzman's going to join us with his Blues in Chicago update. He's got some great tidbits from around the blues scene, locally and nationally, so stay tuned for that. And then our special guest is Will Phelan. He's going to be coming on, singer, songwriter, composer, educator. Again, Will and I have talked. We're going to do some things with him over at the Epiphany Center for the Arts because we're all genres over there, but we're on a little bit of a hold, but it's great. So we're going to catch up with Will tomorrow. And he's a fascinating story because he teaches a lot of different students, a lot of different ages, but then he also is like an accomplished musician. He's toured all over the country. So we're going to talk to Will tomorrow. But before we get to Will, let's bring in Chuck Webb. There he is. He's on. He's happening. How are you, man? How you doing? Oh,
I'm here. I got to rush out to a gig in a few minutes, so I don't have a lot of time, but we got to speed this up.
Yeah. All right, yeah, it's a top secret speakeasy gig, right, where everybody's going to get sick.
It's called the mask room. Everybody wears a mask.
Yeah. Well, you laugh now, but in September and October, that's exactly what's probably going to be happening. So,
Yeah, that definitely will. We'll get into it. I saw a thing about large theaters and orchestral performance halls where they're trying to figure out how to open back up with, social distancing. So now they're talking about, a 2,000 seat auditorium. They're going to have to put blank empty rows between seats and empty seats between seats. So, 2,000 seat capacity may go down to 500 seats. It's going to be a whole new thing for quite a while.
It's going to be a whole new thing, and I'm right with you because that's the kind of stuff that we've been discussing at Epiphany, and also the kind of stuff that I believe after talking to a lot of people, somewhat in the know, is that when things open, and I just think it regularly, right? I mean, every club, every venue, every theater, they're going to be capacity limited just because of what's happening and the situation that's happening. So the economics are going to have to change. There's going to be a whole different figuring things out on how things can work. I mean, this whole thing is going to restructure the live performance, not only the artists, not only the staffs, but also the venues for months and months and months to come if we're going to try to reopen,
Yeah, and everybody's going to have to work together. They're talking about in some of these large venues, doubling or maybe tripling ticket prices, which would be a real drag. But, and performers may have to agree to perform for less just to keep things moving. So, it'll all develop as time goes on. We'll just have to see.
Yeah, and I mean, you and I know of a lot of venues. We know a lot of venue owners because you've played in tons of venues over the years, and so have I. And I mean, 99% of them are great people, and they're running a business, and they're running on low margins usually, so they have big weekends in order to make up Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday performances. And I'm feeling for them because I mean, just to be sitting vacant and like just closed down because of this out of necessity, it's going to hurt them for months and months, years to come if some of them don't even open again at all. I mean, so it's one of those things. I think we're all going to have to work together in order to make some stuff happen, in order to get things going in the short term for a long-term success for a lot of places,
Yeah, yeah. And, I've heard through the grapevine, I don't want to say anything now, but a lot of landmark, state clubs are already, either closing or thinking about, not being able to reopen again just because they can't, they got overhead, they got rent to pay and leases and all of that. So, man, I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, look at Chicago Jazz Magazine. I mean, just a small section of that. But I mean, our big business model is really the clubs, the venues, the festivals. All the festivals are canceled. I mean, not
Sure.
Jazz Fest isn't canceled yet, but I mean, blues is canceled, house, gospel,
Yep.
taste, I'm sure is, how could that happen? And then you're
Mm.
looking at everything else plus all the venues. So, I mean, all of our advertising dollars just gone like in one
Yeah.
day, So, I
Yeah.
mean, we're
Oh,
all in
well.
the same boat.
Yeah. And on a lighter note, now that we've depressed everybody,
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? I gotta go, Chuck. I gotta start drinking.
yeah, man, yeah, thanks. It's nice. So I got to get to my gig anyway.
Yeah, that's right. Forgot about that. All right. On a lighter note, on a better note, let's talk about the new group you started. I think you guys, I know you've been playing with these guys for years, but you put this group together and consolidated some of the top guys in Chicago. I think that I know you love playing with, and the grooves and stuff that you're doing is, I mean, it's ridiculous. It's exactly the kind of stuff that I like because it's the elements of jazz, funk, fusion, some bluesy stuff in there, and everything else in between mixed together. So talk a little bit about it. Groove Tonic.
Yeah. So anyway, there it is. I don't know if you can see the shirt. Guru Tonic.
Guru Tonic. What am I saying? Groove Tonic.
I got my swag T-shirt on. So Guru Tonic was an idea that had been in my brain for a long time, and it was basically to just put a band together to play music that I like, irregardless of categories, irregardless of genre, but with a thread of jazz going through it to tie everything together. And so I mean, if I had to compare what we do to other groups, I would say if you took, say, the Yellow Jackets and made them a little funkier, you took Snarky Puppy and made them more jazzy. You take all these things and kind of blend them together. And so anyway, that was the concept for Guru Tonic. And I wanted to play with the best cats that I knew and the people that I just like as human beings. So I think I really, I pat myself on the back. I nailed it on that respect. I've got Tom Vaitzis, which is one of the baddest keyboard players I've ever played with in my life. Fitzgerald on guitar, and Leonard Stroud, who, a lot of guys on the scene don't know about Leonard, but once you've heard him, and especially if you're a musician, and once you play him, you'll be like, where have you been all my life? Just, groove, musical, tasteful, can play every style. And so that was the concept. And we got together early last year. I wrote a bunch of tunes, and we did a live recording of actually one of our first gigs at a club up on the north side called the Blue Nocturne, which is a great spot run by my buddy Nick Tremulous, who owns that. And it's actually
he owns that. That's right.
Yeah, and you talked about speakeasies before. Blue Nocturne is kind of a speakeasy. It's in the basement of where is it? Oh, the Chopin Theater up on West Division. It's in the basement of that, and it's a cool venue. So I played in the house band at that club for Nick, and as soon as I saw that place, I was like, this is one of the coolest rooms in town. So I said, I want to do something here. And then when the project came together, he booked us a date there. They got a great sound man. They got a board. And so we said, let's do a live recording. So I got multi-camera shoots. Tim Bales, great trumpet player, came and got a live video and a live album out of it. And that's what we've got going. So, hey, hope you don't mind. There it is. Guru Tana. And
all right,
the music is a kind of a cross between funk, jazz, fusion, straight ahead. So, sometimes acoustic bass, sometimes I play electric bass, sometimes Tommy play acoustic piano, sometimes they play Rhodes synthesizer. So we really mix it up a lot.
Yeah, the one thing I was going to say is that everybody in that band can play all different styles, and it's also because you love all the different styles, because you've been influenced by all the different styles. So when I first heard the band, and Guru Tonic, what a name, by the way, but but when I first heard the band and I saw some of the live video stuff, I was like, this makes total sense, because this is the stuff that I would hear you guys playing individually. I played with Tommy a million times like you have, and we're always playing, smooth jazz to funk to blues to rock to gospel, whatever. I mean, he can handle all of that stuff. And then, playing with Tim Fitzgerald, same kind of thing. But you guys have all had those influences. I mean, that's got to be just like, it's finally like a group that you're like, you know what, I'm going to do this. We're going to put this together, and we're going to play all these different styles that I'm influenced by, rather than trying to just specifically go after one genre. Is that how all of this sort of came about?
Right. That's exactly how it came about. And in order to get it started, there had to be some original material. So, I went back into my archives and came up with some my old stuff that I revamped, and I wrote some original stuff, and we picked some cover tunes and the kind of rule in the band is, if we do a cover or we do a standard, we have to Guru Tanicize it. We have to make it our own. So we do a couple of straight ahead standards, but you've never heard the way we do them. And so that was the reason, the concept behind it. I don't know from a marketing standpoint if it's the smartest marketing move, but what I've found is, because jazz is the kind of common thread, and I've had to become the band leader, de facto band leader, and up until this whole Corona situation, I was booking gigs and cold calling clubs and all of that, and kind of finding out what clubs were expressing interest in what we did. And basically, jazz and contemporary music and experimental music venues were who we were really getting some traction with, as well as, straight ahead clubs like the Jazz Showcase. We played there, and we actually did our CD release concert at the Jazz Showcase.
That's right.
Came off really.
That's right. Yeah. Well, and also, I mean, it's one of those things, right? Because it's a new group. So the clubs that know who you are or somebody else in the band is going to be familiar with you guys. And that's where you guys have been performing, in the jazz and the contemporary clubs and things like that. But this kind of music, I think it lends itself to crossover. And you and I have talked about this in the past too, where, that casual music fan doesn't care if it's blues, rock, Latin, jazz, a mixture of everything. If they hear it, they can feel it, they like what it is, they're going to dig it. So it's one of those things, just breaking into one of those clubs that have, that crossover genre where you're going to have the rock clubs and the, all that. You could easily play there. It's just a matter of getting your foot through the door in order to do it. And I think that's one of the reasons why you and I were talking about doing something at Epiphany, is because we're going after that casual music fan, which I know they're going to dig this kind of stuff.
Sure, absolutely. And the casual music fan and the jazz music fan, because I think that deep down, even the diehard straight ahead jazz music fans, if you play a funky groove but you still have the integrity of some accomplished soloists on top of that funky groove, then you can win them over too. Mm-hmm. I mean, because you go back to the late 50s, early 60s with soul jazz and all of the straight ahead jazz players. A lot of these guys were playing bebop type solos over basically R&B and soul vamps groove.
Right.
And it was the popular music of the time. So yeah, so that's what we're trying to do. And because it's a young group, we were just getting to the point when the world changed that we were starting to develop our sound. And other members of the band were bringing in tunes. Tim, our last rehearsal before we couldn't rehearse anymore, Tim Fitzgerald brought in a great tune, and we had worked that up. So, we're on the cusp of really trying to making something very unique. So as soon as we can get back to it, we will. Right now we're kind of working remotely. We've got a Dropbox folder, and we're, sending stuff back and forth. So we can do the best you can with what you've got in the current reality.
Well, you guys also had a couple of festivals in the summer, right? Because I know that when you and I talked, you had
some. You're gonna make me cry, man. We had gigs booked. We had summer festivals in. Oh man, I got to go back and look at the schedule, but. Yeah, I just went into my date book the other day with a red pen and put X's on everything. So yeah, we had, and I learned a lot over the winter about marketing, because all of a sudden I realized, we've got this group, but if somebody doesn't go out and beat the bushes and let people know who we are, we're never going to do anything. So I had to learn how to market a band and learn how to cold call clubs and learn how to send out emails and all of that. And it was very humbling at first, when you send out emails and you think the band is killing and it's crickets and nobody responds. And then I got some good advice, good friends of mine. This vibraphonist named Stephen Liner. Do you know him?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Yep.
I talked to Stephen. He's a good friend of mine, and I told him what I was doing, and he's been a band leader for the longest time. And he said, Chuck, send me the email you're sending to the clubs. And I sent it to him, and he was like, dude, nobody's going to read this. Because, it was like bios and links, and it was like four paragraphs long. I didn't know any better. I figured the more information, the better. He's like, these guys are busy. These people in these clubs are busy. They don't want to hear all of that. They just want to know your name. Here's a link. If I want to check it out, this is how I get in touch with you if I like it.
That's
literally the next 2 or 3 days, I changed the format of the way I was, sending out stuff, and I started getting responses and I started getting bookings. So there's a trick to that, and there's a lot of musicians don't understand that. So, I'm learning as we go. I'm learning.
Well, and it's funny too, because let's talk a little bit about career outside of Guru Tonic, because you do have one. I know you guys are making the big bucks in Guru Tonic right now, so you don't have to do anything else. Right. But you came up playing in the clubs, and then you've been on tour. I mean, we could list everybody you've been on tour with, Aretha Franklin being one of them, I believe. But you've been on tour and stuff. But isn't it interesting for somebody like you who's accomplished and you're playing and you're getting tons of calls for different gigs and performances and stuff, when the shoe's on the other side, when all of a sudden it's like you have to do it, you have probably a little bit greater appreciation for the gigs when somebody else is setting things up, because you're like, God, how did they set up 12? I mean, I'm astonished sometimes. How do they set up 12, like a Midwest tour? How did they even do that, to think about how to put that together? I mean, that's a heavy lift. And as you know, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to make any money at all. It's like you're spending all this time to put all this effort in, but it's a project obviously that you love. So it makes total sense to me. But talk a little bit about that, because isn't it interesting with you being a leader and you were playing in all these other groups for so long? I mean, what a switch, right?
Yeah, it was a switch. But, I'll tell you, the reality that I've known for a long time is that as a musician, you can be in one venue or I'll give you an example. This is the best way for me to explain how I came to. I played with Ramsey Lewis for 10 years.
Yeah.
And so, Ramsey plays all over the world. It was a great experience. One Friday night, we played in New York, and we played at Carnegie Hall. We were part of a big jazz festival. I forgot the name of the festival, but we played in Carnegie Hall. The next Saturday morning, I got on a plane. I flew back to Chicago. That night, I played at the diviest of dive bars with couple of friends of mine, smoky club for about 11 people the whole night, but had a great time.
Sure.
So, you can't get an ego to think that I will always be playing Carnegie Hall, because otherwise you may not be playing, right?
Right.
So I that dichotomy exists. So it's because I've been able to play on some big tours. I did take a lot of the behind the scenes work for granted.
Mm-hmm.
You know how much work it takes, and that's really a full-time job. So to be a band leader and a musician in the band and a writer in the group and the booking manager and all, it's incredibly difficult work. It's time consuming. You know, you have to be a master of time management in order to make it happen. I found that out. Really, you can't slouch, or otherwise the phone won't ring.
Well, and the other thing is, because you know, I've done that for years and years and years, you know, booked my own bands or whatever it is, doing all that, hitting all the clubs and stuff. The worst part about it, especially as a drummer, I don't know how it is, probably the same thing as a bass player, but like a sax player, they just go off into la la land. They don't care anyways. But, you know, as a drummer, we never get a break because we're playing the whole time, you and I. You know, everybody else plays their solo and they leave the stage. I would sit there and I would count heads as they came in the door to see, okay, all right, cool, man. We got 15 people. Oh, good. Now we're up to 30. Okay, let's see. 5 times 30. Let's see. All right, everybody's having drinks, right? Everything's cool. I mean, that's the problem.
And you're doing this while you're playing, right?
Yeah, right. Of course. You know? But I mean, that's part of the deal too, is that as a leader, you're worried about a whole host of other things rather than just playing. And, you know, if you can balance all of that together and still be very creative, that's the, you know, the key. That's the big thing to shoot for, you know.
Yeah. And you know, I've just started to do that, so I wish I had pearls of wisdom to drop for people who are starting it, but I'm a baby at it. I'm just learning that whole process. I've always been pretty a pretty good time manager, so you know, I have schedules. I know how to keep schedules for myself personally. So when I was booking, when there were gigs to be booked, I would set aside like 2 hours in the morning and I would sit down at the computer and I just wouldn't get up until I sent out X number of emails, returned replies, keeping a spreadsheet about the clubs that responded and they said, yeah, we like what you do. We don't have any bookings, any openings right now, but get back to us in such and such time. So, you know, I was good at that.
Yeah.
And, but it didn't all kick in to the point where we were gigging and rehearsing and writing, because then Corona hit. So we'll see. Hopefully I'll be able to pick up where I left off and we'll get this thing rolling.
Well, let's talk a little bit about time management and about discipline and all that, because we'll go backwards here, because when you were first coming up, is that something that was instilled in you from a teacher? Because I got my whole scheduling, because you and I are a lot the same. I'm still up, man. I get up. I've got a schedule. I'm keeping on a schedule. I'm cranking. I'm doing a lot of different things, even during this whole time. But I don't feel right if I'm not. I can't just sit around because of the way I was taking lessons way back in the day, and it just continued on through. Is that something that was ingrained through music and the way you learned music, that scheduling part?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't that a teacher or anybody told me you have to, you know, be very tight with your time. But I realized that in order to do what I wanted to do, which was to play at the highest level that there was, I knew that I didn't have enough inherent basic talent to not buckle down and practice the time. You know, and I think there were some people when I went to college, I went to the University of Miami, and I was certainly not the most talented bass player or musician there, but I had strong work ethic because I wanted to play as good as the best cats. So I knew if maybe they had to practice an hour, I might have to practice 3 or 4 hours to get to that same level. And I was fine with that because I loved practicing. I loved having the instrument, the bass in my hands. And I still do. You know, it's many hundreds of years later. I mean, I still like to practice. And when things were happening and I was really busy, it was difficult to carve a solid hour out of my day to sit down and practice. And when I did have it, it was a super luxury.
Mm-hmm.
And that, you know, I've got 4 or 5 hours every day. You know, I'm trying to take advantage of it and not waste that time. But yeah, I just felt like in order to get to where I needed to be, I had to put the time in.
You know,
and when I got into musical theater work, I realized that learning a top flight musical theater show is a big commitment, and you can't go in there and not sound good.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not acceptable because you won't get called back. There's so much money. A show like, let's say, Jersey Boys that I did for over 2 years.
Right.
You think about how much money just to have an hour rehearsal. They got to pay all the musicians, all this. They got technicians. It's just a massive amount of money. And you don't want to be the one that causes a 5-minute delay because your equipment is not working or you can't read your part or whatever. So it takes hours and hours and hours of prep time in the shed, in the basement,
Yeah.
in the bed, wherever it is, so that you can be able to perform at that level.
And have you ever been in a rehearsal where there's somebody else in the pit that actually is like doesn't have their crap together and everybody's like, are you kidding me? I mean, I couldn't, the way you just described that, I couldn't imagine.
Yes, I have.
Oh,
and
man.
The next day they weren't back. They didn't come back. Oh yeah. I've been in situations where cats got fired because of I've been in situations where people got fired for non-musical reasons,
mm-hmm.
Just personality reasons, can't get there on time, blah, blah, blah. And then I've been in situations where great people, everything is cool, but the music just wasn't right. And sometimes it was just technical ability, and sometimes it just wasn't the right player for the gig, and it happens sometimes. And it's it's a sinking feeling, and you don't ever want to experience that. That's why you spend the time. Part of it is fear of failure.
That's right.
You put the time in because you don't want to be the one to get the pink slip.
Right. That's right. You brought up an interesting point too. Let's talk about you playing with Ramsey Lewis or playing with, who else? You played with Ramsey for a long time. That was probably the longest group touring wise you were with, right? Was Ramsey? On that level?
The single longest group. My very first tour was with DiMeola.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, that was 1987 that I did that. And I did it for almost 2 years. And there's interesting stories behind that. When Al, for this particular record that he wanted to go out on tour with, he wanted to have Daryl Jones play bass. Because at that time, Daryl was the hot, he still is, but he was the hot guy. Miles, Sting, all this stuff, Daryl was super hot.
Yeah.
And Daryl just either didn't want to do it or didn't have time or whatever. So they decided to have an open call audition for the DiMeola gig. And I'm in Chicago. I never met DiMeola. I just know him from records. And one day I get a call. I'll never forget. I'm sitting at my dining room table. I get a call. Hey, this is Dave Sargent. I'm DiMeola's tour manager. Your name came up, and we wanted to know if you'd like to audition for the upcoming DiMeola tour. And I'm looking at the phone like, who is this? What are you talking about? Right? So long story short, they were auditioning bass players at SIR Studio in New York. This was a Wednesday. The audition was Friday. So out of the clear blue, he asked me if I want to do that. I don't, I've heard DiMeola's music, but I didn't know I couldn't play his tunes, right?
Yeah, right, yeah.
Between now and Friday, I'm not going to get it together like that, right? So I said, hold on a second. And I put the phone down, and I had this conversation in my brain, like, man, you got to do it. You got to do it. And the other guy's shoulder was like, no, man, no, you can't get the DiMeola gig. Don't even try it. But I decided that if I didn't do it, I'd kick myself for just punking out and not just having the experience.
Yeah.
So I came back on the phone, composed myself. I said, sure, I'll be there. I didn't tell him I had to book a flight. I had to get there. I had to spend all this money. Anyway, Daryl Jones had recommended me. They had called Daryl and asked him for recommendation. So he put my name in the hat. So I get to New York. I get to SIR. I hope this is not too long.
No, it's interesting. What are you talking about?
So I book a flight, round trip. I get there, I think, 9 o'clock in the morning, and my flight leaves at like 8 o'clock that night, just in and out. And I had a time, I think my time at SIR was like 2:00 in the afternoon. So I don't even have a hotel. I just go, right?
Yeah, right.
So
yeah.
I got picked on my back. I know no Al DiMeola tunes whatsoever, right? So I get a cab. I go to SIR. The audition's on the second floor. I go in the front door, walk up the steps, and it seemed like some type of weird science fiction movie. I walked up the step, and it looked like every bass player in the world was lined up on both sides of the hallway, waiting to go in to audition for Al DiMeola. I mean, there's guys sitting on the floor, like shredding, you know, they got headphones on and they're sweating. And it's like, I'm thinking, oh my God, let me just go back to Chicago, right? So anyway, I wait my turn. I get called in. The whole band is there. I think Al was there. Keyboard player, great keyboard player named Kei Akagi was there. The drummer was Tom Breckline, who's Robin Ford, just great LA drummer, good friend of mine to this day. And percussionist, I don't know if the percussion was there, but anyway, everybody was cool. They said, "Hey, how you doing? Looked on the list. You're Chuck Webb, huh?" I said, "Yeah." And I said, "Okay, cool. We'll play a couple of things." So they put this chart in front of me that looked like it had been washed in a dishwasher. It's just raggedy piece of chart with nothing but like 8th and 16th notes all over it, right? So, I mean, I'm out of college, can read, you know, but it's like I went through it, played it the best I could play. I might have gotten maybe 60, 70% of the notes right. And I was like, okay, well, this is done. I can go home now, right?
Yeah, right.
So they said, okay, yeah, man, all right. And here, let's take this tune. Here's a solo section here. We're gonna play this groove, and and Al's gonna solo. So they played this tune, and it was kind of like a Montuno Latin kind of groove, just real groovy kind of thing. Yeah. And I said, if I can't do anything else, I can groove, right? So we play this tune, and I just lay into this pocket, and Tom Breckline looks up at me and kind of gives me a smile. And then Al goes into this shredding, just killing solo. And we play that for a long time. We get into that for a long time. So we stop and everybody say, "Yeah, man, sound great, good job. All right, thanks. We got a lot of people to listen to, blah, 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 blah. Thanks a lot." And I leave. And so I'm thinking, well, I did it. I have an experience. I can tell a story. Fine. I'll never hear from Al DiMeola again.
Yeah.
2 days later, the tour manager calls me up and said, "Chuck, hey, this is Dave. Congratulations. You got the gig. We'll send you the information. I get this big giant envelope in the mail from Ted Curlin and Associates. I don't know if anybody knows, that's one of the big tour management companies. And so the rest is history. So I found out later from the guys in the band. I asked them, this was a couple of weeks into the tour. I'm like, "Dude, I know some of those bass players that were out there played this stuff better than me. What is it? Why did I get this gig?" And I think it was Tommy that said, "Look, we all knew that when you played the first chart, that you could read and you could get the fancy lines together. Mm-hmm. You could shed that and get that together. But what we liked was you made the whole band feel good. The groove was solid, and we knew that that's something that somebody else couldn't learn."
Yeah. So
we had confidence that you'd go home and learn these songs and learn the unison parts and blah, 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 blah. So that was my takeaway. It's like, no matter what else happens, it's got to feel good.
Yeah. No, what a story. I've never heard you tell that story before. That's great.
Yeah, I went off on a tangent. I guess the simple question was, who did I play for? But yeah, I did Al DiMeola, and I did Aretha Franklin for quite a while, Jerry Butler for quite a while. I did some subbing for David Sanborn, Phil Perry, the fusion, the singer. And a lot of people, check my website if you want to know.
And my second question was going to be, but that Al DiMeola story, man, that's classic stuff. I mean, because 99% of the time, you're right, you would have never gotten a call back. So, I mean, that just goes to show you that they heard something there, and they they also like your vibe probably too. They're like, okay, we could deal with this guy. This guy can lay
Yeah.
it all down, But you had a good
Right.
attitude probably going in there too, because you
I
guys.
did. You know what? I got nothing to lose to.
Yeah.
Other guys really, really wanted that gig. I think I had a chance to get that gig. I was totally relaxed. So I think maybe that showed.
When you're playing with all these different artists, and even now when you're doing musicals and everything, I want to get your take, because I think that it from me, from a standpoint of a musician, if I'm working for somebody else, I just tell me what you want to hear, because I can probably play it without a problem. Don't leave me guessing, because you've been on those gigs where they're like, yeah man, it sounds good, and then 3 days later, hey man, that guy, he's not playing the stuff that I really want to hear, so let's get rid of him. Well, why didn't you just tell him what you wanted to hear originally? So when you're playing with these heavy duty artists, I mean, is there a lot of feedback that they give you and say, hey, you know what, that sounds really good, Chuck, but just lay back a little bit, or don't play so many notes here, or whatever it is? I mean, do you get that kind of feedback from those artists?
Here, I'm glad. That's a very good question. The short answer is no. And here's why. And I've gotten, and I know this from personal experience. The artists that are at a high level hire sidemen or other artists to be at a high level. They don't want to be bothered with anybody that they have to bring up to their level.
Mm-hmm.
So if they book you on a gig, if you get the gig, it's assumed that are familiar enough with their material that you will come and bring your personality, your musicality to that material with authority. And that's the word. And I tell my students this all the time, because I got fired from a gig. It happens to everybody. Not fired, but it was a two-part situation where I was subbing for another musician. And it was a U.S. tour, and then it was going to be some time overseas.
Mm-hmm.
I came into the situation a little tentative because I wanted to do a good job. And I did a good job in the U.S. tour, but when it came time to go to Europe, they didn't ask me to continue. And I was devastated by that for a while. And I had board tapes. I was listening to I listened to the recordings of what I sounded like and what I did. And I thought I sounded good. But what I finally realized, and it took a long time to get to this point, was when you're playing on that level, you can't be playing to try to get others' approval, other people's in the band approval. You have to go in and take charge. If you're the bass player, they don't want to have to worry about the bass player. They don't want to have to tell you to play softer, play louder, play more aggressive, play whatever. They want the bass to be right so they can do what they do.
Right.
And so I came in with that attitude I'm playing good, but hey, is this cool? What do you think? And that was the kiss of death. Right. So ever since then, I know, and it's not an arrogance thing. It's not an arrogance thing at all. It's a confidence thing.
Yeah.
It's like if you're on the dream team or the U.S. Olympic basketball team, and you're the power forward, they want you to get the rebound and lead the fast break. I mean, it's like we're all on the same level and we're at the top of our game, and we don't have time to bring you up here. If you're not ready, sit on the bench, right? So that's a long explanation to answer your question, but it's really no at that level. Now, once you're in and you've kind of proven that you are cool and you've gotten everybody's approval, if you're hanging out on the tour bus or you're at the bar and kicking it and talking to one of the other band members, they might tell you, hey man, it sounds great. This tune, maybe lay back, you might get that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But don't expect it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So you got to bring it from the beginning.
I think that's one of the biggest questions, right? That especially, younger musicians or musicians that have only played in their own cliques. When they start to get and move up in the chain, food chain a little bit, they start getting those bigger gigs. That's one of the biggest questions. I think you just described it differently than what I've heard other people describe it as. But it's like, you're right. You're not playing for their approval. You need to come in and play. And I think that's the great way to think about it. You're like the same way you got the DiMeola gig, right? You walked in, what do you got to lose? Here you go. I'm Chuck Webb and I'm playing Chuck Webb. This is it. You don't like it? I'll see you later. I'm getting on my flight anyways. It's kind of the same way.
Appropriate. I mean, you just can't go overplay on some, it's got to be musical, right? Yeah. So, yeah.
But yeah, that was great. That's a great explanation. I hadn't heard it explained that way, but that's a great way to put it, So before we wrap things up here, I would be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about playing in these musicals. And you talked a little bit about being prepared and walking in, but what are some of the challenges? I mean, you're playing, 8 shows a week usually? Because there's two on Saturday or 2 on Sunday, something like that?
Well, different theaters have different schedules, but the standard is an 8-show week.
Yeah.
The same show every time. And for some people, some musicians, that will drive them insane. And I get it. And so it's not for everybody. It really is not for everybody, but I've always enjoyed it. It's a challenge to bring the music at the highest level every time, and some days twice a day. It really is a challenge to do that, and I like that challenge. It's a mental focus. The most difficult part about playing shows is the mental focus. Mm-hmm. Especially if you've done it, for weeks and weeks. Your fingers, your body, your ears, the charts, the music. The problem is you might be in the middle of the simplest cue and thinking about what you're going to eat for dinner and then zone out and make a mistake. So it's always about bringing your mind back to focus, bringing it back to focus, meditative in a way. In order to do this level consistently, it's like a meditation thing. And then it's now with the way things are in the big theaters, you're always on Aviom, so you basically can mix your own show in your headphones. Oh. So it's almost like being in a recording session every night with great musicians and great scores. So I've always, dug being a studio musician. So it's kind of like being in a live studio situation.
Yeah, do you watch? I mean, are you able to watch the show from the pit, or you're too far underneath it, right? You're not really seeing it, are you?
Yeah, usually not. Usually it, depending on how every theater is set up, every situation is different. But more often than not, you can't see anything. I sub on Hamilton a lot, and so in Chicago, the band is completely covered up. You can't see anything. But on the road, I went out on the road and subbed on the road, and a couple of the theaters, they have big open pits. So because of the stand-up bass, the bass player is usually at the front of the pit. So you can look over the top of the stage and see the actors. So, it just depends. It's always different.
Yeah. And you're reliant upon the conductor at that point, right? To give you cues. And if something goes strange up on the stage and he has to jump in a little earlier than normal or something, you got to watch him, right?
Right. It's a very different musical environment than most other things. And it's a difficult situation to learn how to do unless you do it. I've got students that say, man, I want to play in, orchestra pits and whatnot. And they ask me how to do it. And I say, any situation you can get to play, even if it's a high school musical or community theater, you got to do it because you got to learn how this whole vibe goes.
Yeah.
Watching the conductor, listening to cues, playing the part, all of this stuff it's its own animal. It really is.
Well, and by the way, getting into the circuit you're in, we're getting the calls for that is easier said than done. So when it's like somebody saying, "Hey, I want to be a famous studio musician." Oh, okay. Sure.
With that, right?
Right? No problem.
Well, yeah. Well, the way to get in, I mean, I got in years and years ago because, and the story is too long for me to tell now, but I was doing a lot of jingles in town when there were jingles in Chicago. And there was a lot of cross connection between the cats that were doing the jingles and some of the musicians that were doing the musical theater thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I got a call to do some musical theater because of that. And that's kind of how I broke in. But now the typical way to break in is to sub for someone.
Yeah.
So, because the main guys on a show or women on a show might play it for a year. They're not going to do it 8 shows a week, every week for a year. They're going to want to do other things. And so they get subs. You might have 2 or 3 subs. And so if you can get in and sub on a show, that's how you start to get your name and your face in that circuit. But the key is understanding that subbing is twice as hard as doing the gig regularly.
Yeah, because you're thrown in the
you
fire.
You don't get
man.
the benefit of any rehearsals, of having done it every day, right? You have to come in and learn it. So yes, you can come in and sit next to the person and audit. That's called auditing. Watch the show, get the music in advance. Now they give video camera recordings of the conductor so you can practice with the conductor. So you get all of the help you need. And it's assumed that you're going to work your ass off. You're behind. I don't know if I can say that. You can work hard to learn the show. And when you come in for that first show, when you're a sub, you better nail it.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. I don't mean perfect, because nobody expects perfection. But the best compliment you can get as a sub is for somebody across the pit at intermission to say, oh man, I didn't even know whoever the regular person was gone. Right? You want to come in and seamlessly take over and nobody knows anything has changed. That's the goal for subbing. And you do that enough, and then you can get called back.
Well, I had Charles Heath as one of the feature interviews maybe a year ago or whatever, and I know you play with Charles a lot, and he's got a great story about how he got the gig with Color Purple, and it was just that way. He was auditing the show, and then he subbed, and then he got on the touring version of the whole show and went out on tour. But he killed himself to keep showing up there to audit the show and see it and understand what was happening. He's not getting paid when he's doing that. He's just doing it to make sure that he's ready to roll. And it's exactly what you're talking about. I mean, there's a lot of stuff, as you know, and I'm saying this for the sake of everybody watching this. There's a lot of stuff that musicians do that are all behind the scenes in order for them to get up, and whether they're playing at a club, a venue, a theater, Carnegie Hall for 3 hours and look like, hey man, this is no problem at all. No problem. It's like effortless. It's because of that kind of stuff. They're working with you're not making any money auditing a show. You're not making any money practicing 10 hours a day. That's what you do so that when you walk in, the 3 hours look like it's no problem. And that's the key.
And that's with any entertainment situation. I mean, if you go to the circus and you watch the people at Cirque du Soleil flying on the trapeze and doing all that stuff, it looks like magic.
Yeah.
But then you go behind the scenes and they're sweating and working out and bandaging their arms up because they hurt themselves the previous show. You don't get to see all of that.
No. All right. Well, I knew this was going to be a good interview, and it was even better. So I'm glad, you and I could talk for like 3 hours, I'm sure. I mean, man, I appreciate you doing this, not only for me, but for the whole music community. You're a real gem out here. And I know we talk about hustling behind the scenes, and you are the epitome of hustling behind the scenes, man. So, thank you for having me. I wish you the best. And if you ever get an opening for your show, I'd love to come in and sub and do it again. So let me know. Done. You're hired. It doesn't pay anything, but you're in.
You just got to ask, right?
That's it. All right. So chuckwebbmusic.com. They can get all the information on Guru Tonic and obviously buy the new recording and all that good stuff. And then as soon as everything breaks loose and they're able to see you perform live, whether it's with them or one of your other projects you play with, all the information is at chuckwebbmusic.com. I know you and I are good to go as soon as we're good to go at Epiphany. So I know they're going to be able to see Guru Tonic over at Epiphany once we can actually open up and have people there.
Looking forward to it.
Oh man, yeah. Well, so am I on a lot of levels, right? I think we're all looking forward to doing something here. But Chuck, thanks for jumping on. I appreciate it. Killer interview. I loved it, man. Great information, and definitely we're going to do this again soon.
Great, man. Thanks,
All
Mike.
right, Chuck. Talk to you soon.
All right.
All right, Chuck Webb. Well, that the stories he was telling, you're not going to hear that anywhere else. I'll tell you that right now. And he and I have known each other for years, and his wonderful wife, Margaret Murphy Webb, she's actually part of the Year of Chicago Music Steering Committee. She's up planning and stuff. So I know that she's been, devastated by this entire Chicago music situation with COVID-19. But we're going to come back out on side. Everything's going to be good. And 2021, end of 2020, and then 2021 is going to be killer. And it's just we're going to make it up. We're going to make up for all the lost time in 2021. But in the meantime, Chicago Music Revealed, we're trying to keep the community together here. So as I always say, leave us a comment, DM us. If you have somebody that we should talk to, definitely hit me up, PM me, send us an email through chicagomusicrevealed.com, where all the shows are archived in addition to on social. And, we'll do it, man. We'll do it. As I always say, if you like what you're hearing, please share it. Please like it. Hit that like button. Please like it. And tell your neighbors, tell your family, call the grandkids, 4 p.m. every day, Monday through Friday, Chicago Music Revealed. So tomorrow we've got Blues in Chicago with Dave Katzman, an update about blues happening locally and nationally. And then also Will Phelan's going to be on it. We're going to talk all about singer-songwriter, education, and, he's an incredible musician and a different genre than I've covered so far. So it's pop, rock, folk, all sorts of different styles and genres in that realm. So we're going to talk to Will all about that. That's going to be a fun interview. So again, I appreciate everyone listening, everyone hanging out today. And as I always say, if you can't get out and see somebody play right now, which you can't, hit them up on Facebook, hit them up on their website, buy a CD, buy a gift card to a venue that is closed right now, because it will appreciate it in the long run. And, we'll get out of this entire situation. So hopefully I will see you somewhere in person at some point soon. But until next time, I will see you tomorrow on Chicago Music Revealed. Stay safe.